All right, everyone. I have Ashley Bernardi here, and I'm really excited to talk to her. First of all, she looks like so professional and fancy today, and I'm like, have spackle on my wall behind me. Like, I was like, hey, we're recording video. And then like you show up looking all professional, and I'm like, hey.
I
I've been
love
up
it.
for 3, 4 hours, but look like I just woke up. But I'm really excited to talk to her, especially because she's just been through a lot in her life and in a similar season as a lot of our listeners. She is an author of the book Authentic Power, Give Yourself Permission to Feel. She founded a PR firm. She's a mama, a postpartum survivor, and a lifestyle coach. Is that right?
Life
Life
designer, which is
designer.
a life
Okay.
coach. Yeah.
Okay, life. I knew when I was saying it, I'm like, wait, I wrote down life coach, but I'm pretty sure you told me it was something else. So I'm really excited to dive into it. So I'd love for you just to give us a short introduction to who you are. And obviously, there had to have been something to inspire you writing your book.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, you've just been through so much. So I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm so happy to be here and just having this opportunity to share my story in hopes to help and inspire others. That's really why I wrote my book, Authentic Power, Give Yourself Permission to Feel. It was born out of the pandemic, as many people had these aha moments in 2020 when we were all in lockdown. I found myself in that time faced with very familiar feelings that I had faced before. Feelings of grief, having lost a friend early on in the pandemic, sadness, despair, uncertainty. We were all feeling this. It was a collective trauma. But in 2020, I told myself, I was like, wait a minute, Ashley, you've been here before. You actually know what to do now. And and I kind of gave myself this little pep talk, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I could help others move through these really difficult, uncertain, challenging times. And it really starts with giving yourself permission to feel. And for me, my story begins well before the 2020 pandemic. It actually started in 1995 when I was 11 years old and lost my father to a sudden death heart attack at home in front of me. My mom and sister gave him CPR. I ran to call 911, and there was just nothing we could do. He died. And that rocked my life. It changed everything. From that moment on, I was a completely different person. But at the same time, having gone through that trauma, I did not want to even address it after he passed away. I had counselors try to help. I had a church community. My mom tried to help. But, when somebody needs help, it's really up to them to make that decision and want that help. And instead of addressing the trauma, I just buried it for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. And I was an Oscar worthy actress and looking like I had everything together on the outside, but really on the inside, I was just crumbling. And what happens when you bury trauma and you don't address these feelings and pain, it's going to come out in other ways. For me, it came out in people pleasing, complete lack of boundaries, destructive relationships, work addiction, over drinking, awful relationships. I could go on and on and on. And it wasn't until in 20 was it 2015 when I became pregnant with my third daughter and had delivered her, did I get sick and like really, really sick. And I was diagnosed with postpartum depression and Lyme disease at the same time. Like when I say like I was dying, I was dying. I wanted to die. I was borderline suicidal. I had just wished that like God, if you would just kill me because this is so painful. Everything in my body hurt. I couldn't see. I lost my vision. I got down to 110 pounds and I'm a 5'7" person. So that's very, very thin. I couldn't eat anything and I was severely depressed. I was put in a part-time mental health hospitalization program and eventually diagnosed with Lyme disease, postpartum depression. And it was when I was in my moments of like they say your rock bottom. For me, it was like the depths of despair. Um, that is when I first gave myself permission to feel everything. I was grieving for my health. I was grieving for my mental health. But then surprisingly, in that moment that I gave myself permission, I'll never forget, I was like on my hands and knees in my on the carpet, just sobbing. I also suddenly felt the grief of losing my father, even though it was 20 plus years. It just all started coming out. I still get chills talking about it, but it was the first time that I'd ever given myself permission to really feel my feelings. And from there, that's really where my healing story begins. So I'll stop myself there.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I got chills when you were sharing it too. I can't imagine. Um, and when you're that age, you don't know how to deal. And I mean, it's any age really. I mean, you might not have different tools and grief strikes us in different ways.
Sure.
But especially like at a young age, not really knowing what to do with that and that had to be so much to have it buried for that long.
It's so much. And you bring up a good point. Is like we're not taught how to deal with it. I have spent so much time thinking about this. I think it's the way our culture and society treats this. Like you get bereavement for a week. Back, and I talk about this in my day, like back in the old days, like hundreds of years ago, someone would grieve for a year. You would wear black for a year. And I'm not saying you need to do that now, but give yourself, like, we're not taught to give ourselves permission to feel the sadness that we feel. So for me, a week after my father had died, I was thrust back into school because all the counselors told my mom, hey, just make everything normal for her again. Just make it like it's normal. But I had an adverse reaction to that as a child because nothing was normal. I would
Mhm.
go home and my dad wasn't there. Like my main caregiver, my best friend, and my provider was not there. And that was not normal. So I would just I thought that, okay, let me just, if I'm sad, I don't really feel the permission to express that. And it was, in hindsight, going back to school a week later, probably not the best decision, but I have compassion for caregivers and the professionals because this is what they've been taught too. So I think it comes down to a societal and cultural issue. And that's why I'm like very focused on talking about it. And with my own children, we talk about feelings. My 12-year-old openly goes to therapy and she loves it just to have a safe space to let her feelings out. I want that for my children because I never want anyone to have to go through what I did, which was an extreme health crisis and postpartum depression. To like, it was where my body had no more space left to store the trauma in me, that it all came out in other ways. I'm trying to prevent that from happening to my own children and also to other people by sharing my story.
Mhm. Yeah. And you bring up such a great point with it kind of being like a social, societal and cultural thing as well. We live in such like in America and just like this go, 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 not taking time for relaxation and other things. And I think that so many people listening can just apply that in any other ways and in different types of loss or things like that. It's like right away people are there for you, but what about 6 months from now? Like nobody's checked in. Nobody's been like, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And my parents were actually in town staying with us, and I just randomly asked my dad yesterday, um, his mom passed 4 years ago, and they were so close. He called her every day, and I haven't asked him about it in a long time, and he was, like, sitting at the kitchen, I was, like, cleaning the windows, and I was like, "Hey, dad, like, how are you doing with your mom being gone?" And it was just, like, really nice to sit there and have that conversation with her, and he just, talked to me a little bit about it, and I think that that's something that, like, we've lost. It's like, you don't stop missing this person.
Oh, I mean, no, I mean, I'm having an emotional reaction to that because I am so, it's amazing that took, you had the compassion and care and empathy to even ask your dad about that. Because you're right. Like, we think, like, oh, 4 years, like someone's gotten over the loss of someone. And the interesting thing about grief, and everyone experiences it, is that, and this has been my experience, is that, yeah, some days it feels like my dad passed away 27 years ago. Other days it feels like it was yesterday. And I never know when it's going to hit me. When it does, I find that I just give myself permission to just miss him. Like the other day was his birthday, and it was a great day. We celebrated, like I had a wonderful day with my family. We acknowledged my father and his presence. And after everyone went to bed, for whatever reason, started crying out of nowhere. And the old me would have been like, "Oh, Ashley, like move along, like you're fine." But I gave myself permission to let that out. And I think that's the one thing that I wanted to get across in my book, is that like these feelings are okay. They're uncomfortable and they can be messy. They're scary sometimes, but they're also meant to be felt in a safe and loving and compassionate way. And I find that once we do, there's lessons within them, there's healing within those feelings. And I talk more about this in my book. I have a whole framework that teaches people how to really move through their feelings in a safe and comfortable way. And the other thing I want to say is that, I'm not saying like go and wallow in your emotions. Like if you're depressed, go get help, right? But but I think that we've been culturized to just bury those real feelings, like put on that brave face at work. I was raised in a military family. My father was an army colonel, and so I was raised with the belief that we had to be stoic and strong. And even ironically, that the original title of my book was Not So Strong. Like you don't have to be strong and put on that brave face every day. And like even as a mother, it's okay for your kids, in my view, to see you cry, to get upset. And it teaches them empathy. Like if I'm upset, my kids are like, "Oh mom, like that you need a hug," and they come and hug me. And it's just a beautiful way to teach that these feelings are here for a reason. They're here to teach us something. They're meant to be processed. They're meant to be moved through in the same way that we experience happiness and joy and laughter. It's the same thing for sadness and anger. We're meant to experience them. So that's, I go in my book, all these different techniques of like, how can you do this in a safe and loving way that's supportive for you, that gives yourself that permission to feel.
Hmm. That is so important. This podcast is coming like at an interesting time because I just had a conversation yesterday with my mom's in town with my mom, my mother-in-law, and my husband's aunts and some cousins. We were sitting around a table yesterday talking about trauma and how basically you might screw up your kids no matter what you do, because none of us are perfect. We're all working through our own stuff,
Yeah.
but that our parents kind of come from this mindset of, well, that's just how it was back then.
Yep.
My
That's
mom, both my parents grew up farming, ranching, doing these things. My mom was one of 9 kids. She had to wake up and milk the cows every morning, and like grew up in a farm setting. And there was just, oh, we didn't talk about feelings. We didn't do this. We didn't whatever. That's just how it was back then. And
mhm.
that's just kind of like the answer. And how one of the cousins was talking about, like, how do we, like, it's okay to talk about feelings and everything like that, but sometimes then it's just like so much, because I feel like we're the generation kind of doing that, working through the trauma and
Yeah.
not wanting to pass it on. But yet we're still working through it. So it's like, and then it's almost heavy of like, okay, well, if we're going to screw our kids up no matter what, but coming from this, like, that's just how it was mentality, it just seems like so much. And
Yeah.
that there has to be some level of hope in there of, okay, like, I'm doing the best that I can. My parents did the best that they could based on what they knew how to do. My parents were not like, "Oh, we're gonna screw her up," like
Course. Yeah.
they're like, we're doing the best we can. We're doing what we think's right, and that's
Yep.
what we're doing as well as
Yeah.
parents. So, like, where's this like kind of finding our power to transform that, um, with some spirit of hope in there.
I love that. And I agree with everything you're saying. I have so much compassion for my mom and dad. They were doing the best they could with what they were given, with what they had been taught. And I am encouraged by our generation and the next generations, because I do see a change. And I talk with my girlfriends about this all the time, about how their parents, it's not just you and me, it's a lot of parents from this boomer or beyond generation that, they grew up in an era where the World War II was just ending. And we're taught to just bury things like move along, like everything is fine. And that's what inspired me to write my book, because when the pandemic hit, my fear was that we were just going to move along, everything is fine. When really, this was 2 years of a collective trauma for everyone, for our parents, for us, and our children. Isolation, loneliness, lack of education, loss, grief, all of it. And my fear was that, what if we get out of this and act like nothing just happened and move along like we always have, after every war, after every trauma, after my father's loss, keep like act like everything's normal again, instead of pausing and saying, wait, what the hell just happened? What the hell did we go through? Am I okay? And so during the pandemic, for me, I started writing a lot. And I also gave myself permission to process all of these uncomfortable emotions in real time. And that looks very different for me than it might for you and anyone else. But I remember waking up every day, yoga, every morning down here in my office before my kids woke up, crying on my mat because I had no idea what the day was going to bring. Everyone was home. There was no school. I had to try to work. My husband was still going to work. I was so scared for his health. But like, I'm not an isolated case. Everyone experienced this. And I wanted to teach people that it's okay to, even though we have all these feelings, to move through them. And if you don't have an opportunity to do it in real time, stop, pause when you can, and ask yourself, am I okay? Like, look back at those 2 years. That was a cluster of some trauma. And what did I experience, and what feelings did I bury that I might need to move through and process? So that's why I wrote Authentic Power. And the authentic power part of my book is that pause and sitting with yourself and listening to what it is that you need. And I find that when we do that, that's where we can access the wisdom within us, which is what I call our authentic power. And it's these gentle little nudges that might say, hey, you might need to cry today. You might feel angry. Get curious about those feelings that come up. It's trying to tell you something. It's there to help you. It's there to help you heal.
Mm-hmm. Permission to feel is such a powerful phrase. When you hear that, I feel like that almost evokes an emotion, because when you even have a friend who's like, if you're like, how are you? Good. Okay. No, how are you?
Yes.
You're like, when somebody like genuinely asks me like, how are you? I just want to cry. And sometimes I don't even know why. It's
Yeah.
like, do I even know? Like,
Right. I'm so glad you brought this up, because I bring this up in my book, that even the question, how are you? Like, when you ask someone that, do you really want the honest, authentic answer?
mhm,
So in my book, I suggest maybe positioning to, instead of how are you, how is your heart doing today? That
mm,
almost gives the person that you're asking the question to permission to be honest about how is your heart doing today, instead of how are you. How are you can sometimes be like, oh, I'm fine. That's the general answer. It's like, oh, everything's good, but is it really? And if you want to have that deeper conversation with someone, ask, how is your heart doing today? And I guarantee you're going to get a much more honest answer than how are you?
mhm,
So, and that's another thing, like I talk about in my book, is like really connection through healing. Like, first we need to connect with ourselves. Like, how is my heart doing today? Right? Like, I put my hand on my heart. How is my heart doing today? I journal all the time to check in with my heart. I meditate just to see how I'm doing today. Today I'm a little bit tired. Like, we've been a busy back to school week. How is my heart? You can ask yourself that every day at any given moment, taking breaks to do that, and then connect with yourself first, but then use that as a tool to really connect with others and form those deeper bonds.
mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Um, what's kind of like coming up for me a little bit is how I was saying like that I was talking with like that's just how it was back then.
Yeah.
I also like don't want to like discredit what like the past generations did, because like most of them, like my family, my husband's family, came over as poor immigrants, worked multiple jobs, did a lot of things to try to get their families to where they are now. So I
Oh,
feel like sometimes when we're having this dealing with like emotional trauma, trying to work through things, it's easy to discredit, to be like, well, they knew what hard was. They knew what like hard work and a hard life and actual problems, like, dealing with crazy conditions. My dad was just telling me last night that my grandpa was stuck in a snowstorm in a pickup truck with two guys, and the snow was so packed around the truck they almost died of carbon monoxide. They had to keep it on to keep themselves warm, but they got really really sick. And he
wow.
was like telling me these crazy stories that it's like I'm probably never going to be in that situation. And they had hard lives, so it's like easy to be like, no, well, they knew what hard was. They came here with nothing. They, did all this other things. So it's easy to be like, oh, well, I'm just like emotional. And it's like, well, maybe like that works like preparing the foundation, and it is a generational thing. I feel like we're always carrying on generational things. So now our
Sure.
work is that I'm in a place where I'm not going to be stuck out in a field with a bunch of cows during a blizzard. Um, so I can start doing that healing for my
Yeah.
family, for
Yeah.
me and for my family. So it doesn't discredit their hard work and everything that the generations before us have done.
Mhm.
Um, but our work is different now because I'm not in their position
It
anymore.
it's so true. You're right. And I do think that, and this could be like a whole larger conversation that we have carried on their generational trauma that they've
Mhm.
experienced. And I have, like I said, so much compassion for them. And the experience is same thing, like my grandma's family coming from Italy, and my grandpa's from Ireland, and they started a foundation here, and joined the military, and gave service to their country that was a new country for them. And being where we are now today, you're right. I think that it was like almost like our parents and grandparents setting that foundation, going through a lot and really not knowing any better because they had never been taught this. And here we are now looking back, and we can look back and say, wow, they've been through so much, and I'm here to help heal all of the trauma that they've been. That's where it goes to generational trauma. And so I really do believe that everyone will experience some form of trauma one way or another, whether it's through the pandemic or something like I've experienced, or the trauma that's been passed down from generations. And
Mhm.
if you give yourself the time, permission to move through this in a safe and loving way, perhaps it's with a professional, which I always recommend. Me, as someone who went through postpartum depression and being hospitalized for it, that was the first step to my healing, is getting that professional support. But it's also something that once you get that professional support, that you can learn to do on your own too.
Mhm. I yeah, that's so true. I'd love to dive into a little bit of that postpartum depression. Uh, like how were you able to recognize it?
Mm.
I know a lot of people think that that postpartum depression period could be like just the weeks after you have a baby, but it can extend so much further than that. And just kind of how that was recognized, and then what getting help looked like for you.
Oh, I think this is such an important question, because it hopefully will have your listeners just kind of be mindful of the other mamas in your life, because I, having it, did not recognize I had it. I was so far gone in having panic attacks, OCD, anxiety with the baby, that my sister came to me one night and was like, I'm going to take you somewhere to get some help. And I am so grateful that she did that. And that is something that because she did that, I am so much more mindful of other new mamas too. How is your heart doing today? And also recognizing that, like, my sister had the wherewithal to recognize that I was not okay, and I didn't have the wherewithal to recognize that, or recognize that I needed help. So she drove me to a mental health facility, it was essentially the ER for the brain. And they immediately put me into a part-time hospitalization program immediately. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know I needed this, but I needed this. I was in it for weeks every day for 8 hours a day. Had to leave the baby at home, meeting with therapists, group therapy, psychiatrists, psychologists. And I came out with so many tools to help me move through and become aware of my emotions too. It taught me so much. But I will say to that question, I was so far deep into it, I didn't know. So for your loved ones, for your partners, your family members, be aware and mindful of our new mamas that we have, who've just given birth, and check in on them. I'm grateful I had a sister who knew me, that knew that I was completely off. My husband knew that I was off, but didn't know that there were resources to get help. Like, I think he was just like, oh, she'll get better. But my sister, who was strong enough to say, no, 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 she really needs help. This was my third baby. And I was fine with the first and second. I recovered fine. That's the other thing. You really never know. I thought like, oh, I'm fine. Like, that's my third kid. Nothing wrong here. So I'm grateful, and I will forever be grateful to her for taking me to that facility and having the strength to do something really scary, to have that conversation with me, the courage to say, I'm going to go get you help when I didn't even know I needed it.
But also you had to have had strength and courage to agree to it. You could have
Yes.
easily you
Oh,
could have easily
yes.
said like, "No, I'm fine. I'm not going. Are you crazy?"
Yes, well, and when she gave me that permission to be like, I think I'm noticing this and this, and I was like, yes, I feel this. I'm having panic attacks all the time. I'm anxious all the time. I'm losing all this weight. Something is wrong with me. Thank you. And I went willingly, and was so grateful. And I will be, and I think it's such an important lesson, that just watch out, pay attention to the loved ones in your life, whether they've given birth or not. Check in on them. How is your heart doing? Giving that other person permission to safely share how they're feeling, is just something is so needed these days. It's something I try to do with my kids too. My daughter is 12, and going through a lot of transition. Alyssa, how is your heart feeling today? How did that feel? Letting them know that feelings are okay. We even have a feeling chart on my refrigerator, where even with the littlest one, who's 6, she's now learned to verbalize her emotions. But before, I used to say, like, point to what you're feeling. And it would be frustrated or angry. And I'd say, good, okay, that's great. And letting them know that those feelings aren't bad. They're here for a reason, and it's okay. Right. I talk about this in my book too. And I'm going off it, like, and as we were raised, and you hear a lot of kids, when you're like, a kid is crying, you're like, stop crying, you don't need to cry right now, don't cry. And I say, like, actually, it's okay to cry. So I tell my kids, I understand you're upset. Is there what does support look like to you right now? How can I help you? It's okay to cry. Crying
Mhm.
is here. Like, don't I mean, like, who here doesn't feel a little bit better after they've had a good crying session, right?
Mhm.
So giving ourselves and our kids permission to let that all come out in a safe and loving way, and support them while they're doing it. Even those tantrums, they're learning about their emotions. And so giving them permission to do it is okay in my book. It's something that I'm teaching my kids, because I wasn't taught that growing up. No fault to my parents. They weren't taught that growing up. So back to your point, like, we are really doing this generational healing that I think has been needed for probably hundreds of years. It's all coming out now. At least it is for me. And I can say that once it did, my entire life changed. I'm a completely different person that I am today than I was 7 years ago, when I was going through this health crisis.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. And in your, I mean, we've talked about your book a lot. So it's titled, the beginning of it's Authentic Power. Um, for those listening, like, how would you define authentic power? Like, what does that mean?
I love this question. So, authentic power is the wisdom that we all have within us. It's that inner knowing. And I feel like I didn't at least. I did not ever access my inner knowing. I was too busy bearing all my trauma and acting like everything was okay on the outside, but really my heart, my wisdom within was sad and really struggling. And I never gave myself the time or permission to sit with it and ask myself what it is that I need. We all, and this is like in my life designing program that I went through, I learned that we all have the wisdom within us. We're experts in our own lives. Oftentimes, we all already have the answers. It just takes some time and reflection to ask yourself what it is that I need in this moment. How is my heart doing today? What does support look like for me in this moment? And if you allow yourself to pause and really think about that, sometimes it's journaling, sometimes it's meditating through it, you get so many answers. And this is why I loved the life coaching. I went through this myself, what a life coach does is really, like, they don't give you advice. Like, they're not like, you should do this with your life. They ask powerful questions of you, and reflect back to you what you're hearing, and you're like, oh damn, I said that. That is right. That was exactly what I needed to hear. And so it affirms that to me affirmed that we all have this wisdom in us. That is what I call our authentic power.
Mhm.
Once we learn to access that and give ourselves permission to feel, there is so much beauty, there's so much healing, there's so much transformation that happens. And for me, I continue to grow and transform every day just by getting curious about my own needs. And I know as a mom, that's really hard to do. We have so many needs of others, right? Like 3 kids, you've got 2, we've got partners, all the things. But we absolutely must take that time to check in with ourselves and ask ourselves what it is that I need. Listen to that wisdom, that authentic power that you have within you. As an example, today, it's been a busy week. All the kids went back to school. It's been nonstop. Today, I asked myself what it is that I need to feel supported today. I listened, and it was, Ashley, move your body. Ashley, do something nice for yourself. I'm going to go get my nails done. And then I'm going to go coach cheer with my kids and work. But I'm taking some time to do some things to myself that I'm feeling called to do. That's by really listening to the wisdom within me. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's taking a nap. I used to never give myself permission to take naps. I take naps all the time now. Every weekend, it's my little sacred time. The kids know, my husband knows, mom's going down for a nap for an hour. I used to never do that because I felt like the world wasn't giving me permission to do it. I don't need permission from the world anymore. I'm Ashley. I'm listening to my authentic power. And if I want to take a nap, you are damn well, I'm going to take a nap for sure. So
Mm.
that's long answer to your question. What is authentic power?
I love it. You said so many good things in there that can be applied to motherhood, especially when you're kind of talking about what you do as a life designer, which was going to be my next question. But the not giving advice part, I think that that is so key and powerful that we can apply into our lives, especially in motherhood. Because I saw something the other day that just really resonated with me, and it's a conversation that I've had with people in my life, because especially when you're around your parents, you're around your just your family or friends who have been through it. It's so easy when I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. The baby was up 3 times last night, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, well, here's advice.
You should do this. Yep.
Right. It's
Yep.
so easy. And also it's hard. Like I get it. I get it. Cause there's things that I've been through that I want to pass on. I'm like, wait, this thing worked for me, but it might not work for you. And you
Yeah.
might not be coming to me for advice. It's
Yeah.
so different if I'm like, hey, I'm really struggling here. What did you do when you had 2 kids and you were trying to get one down for a nap and the other one, like, how did you balance that? That's a
Yeah.
completely different question. That's actually me
Yeah.
coming to you with a question versus, man, I'm tired. Like, this is tough. And you're like, oh, well, you got to do this. So that,
Yeah.
like, not giving advice, it'd be like asking a powerful question, acknowledging and validating your
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
That's like where I feel like the motherhood community is lacking. So you just said so many things in there that I'm like, oh, this so applies to motherhood.
Yeah.
Because I just want to be able to vent that I'm tired without you feeling like you have to fix it or give me
Yes.
advice to fix it. And that's like what I need at this part in my journey right now.
Oh my gosh, I love that you're saying this. Like, for anyone interested in the life designer program I went through, you don't need to be a life coach on the other end of this. These are life skills and communication skills and deepening relationship skills that you're learning. So I went through my dear friend Julie Riesler's program, which she founded the Life Designer program. She's actually interviewed in my book. She was my own life coach, and I have taken that and used it to even deepen relationships with my children, with my husband, and with my friends. So when I go walking with my friend and they're like complaining about, I'm so tired, I say, wow, and the kids were up all night. That sounds really hard. Validate it and then listen. Be a listener, because sometimes that is really all someone needs, is just to be a listener, and then reflect back. What I'm hearing you say is that you would appreciate some more help from your husband. When's a time in your life when you felt this way and you did get support? Or what does that support look like to you right now? Asking them those reflective questions, because what I've learned is that when you do that, people already know what they need to do. They just need to hear themselves say it. And I
Mhm.
found that was true for me every single time. And I still have like Julie is still my life coach. And then going through the program, we life coach so many people. um I learn stuff about myself every single time I have a session with her, every single time. And it's because she is there to listen, reflect, and validate. And by reflecting, and I think that's the most powerful part of this, I'm hearing from her my words. And
Mhm.
sometimes when you're speaking, you're not really hearing it until someone reflects it back to you. And that's where my biggest aha moments come from. That is where my biggest aha moments come from, with the people that I work with as well. And like just having those, like seeing the transformation come from folks after they've found their voice, and like, wow, I knew I had that in me. You pulled it out of me. I'm always like, you're the one that did the work. All it took was just someone to listen. And I
Mhm.
feel like that is something that we can do with friends, family, our children, our parents. It's a skill that I've learned and continue to stretch every single day. So I'm like, everyone could be this. You don't need to be a life coach to go through it. So just, I've loved it. It's changed my life.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and you were giving like that little example of walking with your friend and being like, "Oh, well, it sounds like maybe you need some support. Um, what does that look like?" And then being like, "Well, maybe if my husband did this, how would that conversation with him go?" And then
Yes,
they're realizing like,
exactly.
I haven't even told him.
Yes.
I didn't even wait, how would that conversation go? "Hey, honey, I need some more help." Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like, you do really hear that when it's reflected back to you. You're saying out loud what you need, you're just, like, not hearing it. You need somebody to repeat it to you,
Yes.
and that it's so important, and it is such an amazing tool that I need to work on for sure, but can be applied. It can enrich in your friendships, like, not just listening so that you can respond, but, like, listening to really, really hear and just repeating back,
Yeah.
acknowledging their experience. And that's a conversation I've had with my husband too, because he's such a helper. He's awesome. And then there's been like some situations lately where he'll be like, okay, like, how can I help or whatever. I'm like, honestly, all I need for you to say right now is like, wow, that sucks. And I'm
Yeah.
like, just tell me like, wow, babe, that sucks. And I'm like, you're right, it does. Like, like I know you want to be positive. But right now I just need you to be like, yes, that's
Yeah.
sucky. And just let me feel that for a second. And
Yeah.
then we can like move on to be like, okay, like what could make it suck less right
Yes.
now?
Maybe all partners need to go through the life designer program, because my husband is one that's like, cheer up. And I'm like, I don't want to be, that is a major trigger for me. And again, no fault to him. This is how we were taught. This is what we like, cheer up, put on that smiley face and act like everything's okay. That triggers me. And I'm like, I'm not going to cheer up. Why would I act cheerful when I'm not feeling cheerful? So, but yes, it is so important that those we call it in life designer training active listening, just being a listener, not knowing that you're not here to give advice, you're not here to consult, you're literally just here to listen and reflect. It is so simple, but it's so powerful, and it does deepen your relationships. And also, without knowing, you can help people really step into and transform into a better version of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just taking some notes here because I'm like, it's just like I want to leave listeners. I mean, we covered so many things today.
Mm.
Um, And just from the authentic power to trauma to the permission to feel, um, but also taking into your relationships, into your community, listening and reflecting, I feel like can just enrich in those motherhood communities so much. Cause I think
Oh,
that
yeah.
that's where even your permission to feel gets kind of skewed because you're seeing that these other people are maybe rocking it in this stage of life and you're not, or
Yeah.
they're and also you can't go off of, which we've said on here 100 times, like off of what people are just posting on social media. It's not real life. I don't post my worst moments on there. I don't post like the other day when I literally screamed, my mom's in town and my daughter was melting down and the other one's crying in the other room, and I just looked at her and I go, ah! And I'm like, I feel like I need to go in the middle of nowhere, scream at the top of my lungs and
Yeah.
shatter something, and then I'm gonna be okay. And my mom's like, maybe you should go upstairs and scream into your pillow. Maybe that will help. And I'm like, probably. Like I just feel there's something in me that needs to get out. And it's hard when you
Absolutely.
see people that you're like, why does this person seem like they have it all together? And it's like, trust me, they don't. Nobody does. Um, so just kind of taking that into like letting yourself feel and then acknowledging how other people feel and not feeling like we have to fix them, I think is
Absolutely. We
so
do not
important.
have to fix them. And you bring up this that's so important. Really quickly, I'll touch on this. Like that feeling of anger. I need to go scream into a pillow. That's an actual primal emotion. Like that's a natural, primal, physical thing that needing to scream or even sometimes punch a pillow. And I talk about this in my book because I actually interviewed an ER doctor about having a stress soft toolkit and a stress hard toolkit. And I have a section in my book where you can write down like, what does stressing soft look like to you? Maybe it's doing a breathing technique. But in that moment where you're like, I need to go scream into a pillow, that can be in your stress hard toolkit. Maybe it is going to scream into a pillow. Maybe it's doing like a kickboxing class, which I personally love.
Yes.
Maybe it's doing dish therapy where you smash dishes into a trash can, which is what was recommended to me in my book. And there's so many different ways to do that as long as you're doing it in a safe way that it supports you and those around you. You are meant to express your emotions sometimes in a physical way. For me, it's running and getting it out, and I feel so much better afterwards. But I just want to acknowledge that like you already knew what you needed to do, and you were like, I think I need to go scream into a pillow. So I hope you did do that, or I hope next time that you feel that way, you go do that. Like I always tell people and life coaching, like you already had the answers within you. You knew exactly what your body needed to move through and process that emotion. You verbalized it. So the next step is to actually do it.
Yeah, I think signing up for a kickboxing class would be really good for me right now. I haven't done boxing in a long time, but I used to and I loved it.
So
And I
fun.
remember when I first started just beating the crap out of this bag and feeling like I was releasing so much that
Yeah.
I didn't even know was present. I was like, I've
Yeah.
never seen myself as an angry person. I've never seen myself like holding on to so much, but man, it felt so good to just like let go on that bag and punch it as hard as I could. And I'm like, wow, this is therapy.
It truly is therapy. There are places popping up around my area where you can go. They're like smash rooms where it's just
Mhm.
like a bunch of stuff and you take a bat and you smash
Sounds
it.
so good.
Right? And that's the thing. Like our culture now is more open to this,
Yeah.
which I think is so beautiful. Even 27 years later, like it wasn't in the 90s. We didn't have places like this. But I'm feeling that it's becoming more accepted in our society, and I'm so grateful for that because I'm hoping it sets our own children up for a safety net of feeling like they have permission to feel anywhere they go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. I've seen the smash rooms. I don't know if there's one by me. I should look into it.
Yeah,
Look
I
at, is
mean,
there one
all
here?
moms should go to one day.
Yes. I mean, motherhood brings up so much, so
Oh,
much.
so much.
And that's, yeah, lately I've been thinking, I'm like, man, I need to go back to therapy or something. Cause there's just not that I'm like, I don't feel like I'm about to break. I mean, who knows? But I just feel so much coming up and then you're so busy. So it's like I don't know what to do with this right now. Like and then you end up kind of putting it down and because you have to just keep going and then it's going to come out in other ways. So it's the whole conversation all over again. And so I'm like, man, I definitely need to sit down because I know there's some underlying things. I'm not sure what they are, where they come from, but they're there. So
Yeah, I'm hearing like you're almost on this like carousel that you can't
Yes,
get off of, but you're
100%.
asking for it to just can stop for a moment so you can stop and look outside and see it go around and see what you need to do. That's what's needed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, and I love that your daughter like openly talks about going to therapy. I love that it's becoming not stigmatized. That so many people are like, "Oh yeah, my therapy session. Oh yeah," they just openly talk about it. Like they're like, "Wait, you don't have a therapist? That's weird."
Yeah, that's how I feel these days, and it was so great. My daughter actually came to us and was like, "I wanna go to therapy." And
hmm
she knows that I go to therapy, I'm in it once a week, I love it, and when she came to us, I was like, "I am so grateful that you had the courage, like, that's a big step to come and tell someone you wanna go to therapy. Let's do it, girlfriend, like, let's go find someone that takes our insurance and does it," and sure enough, we did, and she loves it so much, just loves it, and I'm so grateful that she's open to it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. Your book is going to be out in November.
It's already out.
Oh, it is
It is
out.
out. You can buy it now. Yeah, visit my website, ashleybernardi.com, or Authentic Power, Give Yourself Permission to Feel is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, all the major bookstores, it's available anywhere.
Nice. Awesome. So I I was thinking it came out in November because I have an email that said that it was available in November. I've been in contact with your people since last year.
Yeah,
So
I know.
that's that's
This just
why.
goes to show, like, mom life, right? Like
Yes. Yeah. Well, this time last year I was very much struggling a lot with being pregnant and having a kid
Of
and feeling
course. You
depressed and a lot of
are.
things. But a while ago, I was like posting on Instagram. I'm like, oh, replying to emails from the last 3 years that I haven't replied to because I'm awful at emailing. But I'm so glad that this finally worked out. I'll leave a
Yeah.
link to where people can find your book. And then is there any other place where they can connect with you at?
You can I'm on Instagram. My personal page is Booker Bernardi, and you can find just visit my website. Everything's there. Ashley Bernardi, BERNARDI.com.
Okay, awesome. And I will have all of those links in the show notes so people can connect with you, get your book, and can follow along with your journey. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for this awesome conversation today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It was such a great conversation. Appreciate you.